I now give the floor to Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to the distinguished representative of Cambodia to introduce an address by the head of government.
Mr. President, I have the distinct honor to introduce the pre-recorded statement by Samdech Akka Moha Sena Padei Techo, the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President of the United Nations General Assembly, Excellency Secretary General of the United Nations Organization, Excellencies, Madam, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, let me express my heartfelt appreciation to Excellency Volkan Bokir for his past effort to guide the work of the 75th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I wish to congratulate as well Excellency Abdullah Shahid for his election as the President of the 76th United Nations General Assembly session. I also have the great pleasure to congratulate His Excellency Antonio Guterres for his second-term reappointment as the United Nations Secretary General. This is the second time that the United Nations General Assembly has to hold its session in a virtual setting due to the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 and the surge of its variant are the biggest challenge and the most disruptive event in modern history. Overcoming the COVID-19 pandemic and efforts to restore growth, economic growth, have been the top priority for all countries. Cambodia has joined international efforts to roll out a widespread vaccination campaign. Our national campaign was launched on the 10th February 2021, and we have made steady progress, including the vaccination of foreign nationals, children, and youth between 6 to 18 years of age. At this rate, we expect to vaccinate around 80%. It's around 13 million people of the total population of around 16 million by no later than November of this year. With good vaccination progress, in combination with strong containment and treatment measures, Cambodia looks ahead to a gradual reopening of a sustainable and inclusive social and economic activity. We take these opportunities to express our sincere thanks to all our bilateral and multilateral friends for the generous support extended to Cambodia in our fight against COVID-19. Mr. President, our world still has to tackle a myriad of other present challenges such as geopolitical competition and rivalries between major powers, technological and trade wars, territorial armed conflict, terrorism and transnational crime, and climate change. The pressure on international peace and security is as great as ever. History has told us time and again that interference and war's military option to impose different systems of governance are not the solutions. Far from it, they have only led to many more deaths, human suffering and misery, social and economic strife. Cambodia is the real-life example and has experienced the worst tragedies, and sadly, we are now witnessing the repetition of the same policies. If the recent event in Afghanistan and many more before it are lessons to be learned from, there is great merit to respect the wishes of each nation and their people's right to self-determination. That is why there is now a compelling reason to strengthen multilateralism and rule-based international cooperation. Countries, large or small, differ in their history, culture, tradition, ways of life, and political organization. They should not be hindered by the imposition of unilateral sanctions, embargoes, or other coercive economic measures that violate international law and the very principle enshrined in the charters of the United Nations. Excellencies, President. This coming November, Cambodia is proud to host virtually the 13th summit of the Asia-Europe meeting, ASEM 13, with a theme, strengthening multilateralism for shared growth, that we view today as still very important. In my view, the main agenda that must dominate the summit should be that multilateralism gives priorities to convergence. Convergence on the fight against COVID-19 and to build back a stronger society and economy. A convergence on the fight against climate change, and on key proposals for WHO reform, among others. Climate change is another impending challenge that requires urgent and concrete global action at all levels. In this context, Cambodia supports the Secretary General's call to scale up support for regional adaptation and mitigation efforts, and reaffirm our commitment to the Paris Agreement in line with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. Excellencies, President, international peace and security are the utmost important for a sustainable future. Cambodia would like to reiterate its long-standing position that the primary responsibilities for the maintenance of international peace and security rest with the United Nations. Since 2006, Cambodia has contributed more than 7,500 troops to serve in various UN peacekeeping missions across the globe. And the numbers of our troops have made the ultimate sacrifice during their mission to protect the innocent. Moreover, Cambodia supports the Secretary General's Action for Peacekeeping Plus, A4P Plus initiative. Cambodia also supports the Women, Peace and Securities agenda, which will help integrate a meaningful gender perspective in various peacekeeping operations. In addition, I would like to re-emphasize that the changing realities of the 21st century demand a newly revamped and responsive United Nations. The organization requires a more democratic, inclusive, and representative approach to the problem of the day. In this light, Cambodia fully supports the Secretary General's proactive efforts to make the organization nimbler and responsive to the needs of its member states. The relationship between the Security Council, the General Assembly, and the United Nations Secretariat must also be reinvigorated. In this regard, Cambodia wishes to reaffirm its support for the Security Council reform. We are of the view that the foremost priority should be given to increasing the representation of developing countries, which comprise the vast majorities of member states. Excellencies, President, as the coming chair of ASEAN next year, Cambodia will seek to address the common challenges facing our region. With a strong solidarity from ASEAN member states and the support of its external partners, Cambodia will aim to further advance the ASEAN community building process and to sustain ASEAN as a region of critical importance for global trade, investment, and supply chain. Cambodia will continue to push for a more vibrant and harmonious ASEAN community with better protection of migrant workers, a greener and more inclusive development agenda, and a more advanced digital transformation for MSMEs, women, and youth entrepreneurship. May I conclude by expressing my strong hope for a strengthened multilateralism with the United Nations at the core, to galvanize international solidarity for the global community to succeed in overcoming the COVID-19 crisis, advancing peace, sustainable development, and shared prosperity for all. Multilateralism is our hope, and we look to the United Nations as our beacon of hope. And I thank you for your kind attention.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Cambodia for the statement just made. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Fiji to introduce an address by the head of government.